Lukas Van Ness, the Loch Ness Monster, Hercules, or Lukas Van Ness, especially next to Rashawn Gary. Let's take a quick look at who Lukas Van Ness is, the prospect that the Packers got, and look ahead to what's going to happen in just a few hours, rounds 2 and 3, and who may be left as the Packers continue to pursue pass catching amongst several other options. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews. Hey, before we dive into Lukas Van Ness, those of you who joined me on last night's live stream, thanks. Had a lot of fun. Few of you stayed the entire time, which was awesome. We had a lot of very fun and good conversation. I learned all about Golden Tate and how he liked to steal things in Seattle. I'd never heard that story, but was a really, really great time. We're going live again tonight for rounds 2 and 3, as well as tomorrow for all the rest of it, rounds 4 through 7. If you did check in last night and there were some tech issues, YouTube just straight up like dumped us twice. So sorry for that. Called some quick audibles, got a new stream up. I did check all of our stuff. It looked like it was YouTube's fault. So I'm going to blame the big company instead of my little connections here. So, hey, let's dive into Lukas Van Ness. Look, here's the deal. He's young, he's hyper athletic, and he fits every single size threshold. Why the Green Bay Packers went here is not exactly shocking. Now, I admit, last night, I felt underwhelmed because I have the viewpoint of coming into this year, this is transition year. This is evaluation year for Jordan Love. And how are you really going to evaluate him when your tight end and wide receiver rooms are just so empty? But with how the rest of the night unfolded, with what's available there on the board yet now, kind of actually easy to see how this all came about and how the Packers could still walk away with a highly satisfactory and impressive draft. We're going to get more into my thoughts in just a minute, but Lukas Van Ness, the man's got a RAS score of 9.39. That is the Packers type. He's also 21 years of age, and that 939 RAS was actually kind of dragged down by his bench number, which was less than impressive. It's also kind of weird because when you watch Lukas Van Ness, that does not look like a man who has difficulty pushing weight around. His predominant aspect of his game is power to an insane level. And then he couldn't do it with a bench press. So regardless, a 939 RAS is one of the more athletic edges that we've seen coming out in years. And really, his closest comps, if you want to dive right into that, the ones that I've seen most frequently happen to be Rashawn Gary. That's just fine. J.J. Watt and Trey Hendrickson. Those are just the 3 most frequent comps that I see from actual draft experts who do this year-round. So it's easy to see why the Packers want to plug in another Rashawn Gary next to Rashawn Gary with Preston Smith just still kind of hanging around in the background. The good things about Lukas Van Ness, you can scan almost any scouting report you want. I looked over a ton of them. Grades too, but here's the deal. Almost all of the pros about Lukas Van Ness are the same thing everywhere. He plays with an out-of-his-mind motor, an absolutely insane bull rush. He's stout against the run. He has the versatility to play a true edge or kick him inside on the line. If you watch Iowa tape, it's impossible not to watch him, even if you're trying to watch somebody else. And even as a redshirt freshman, he was bullying future NFL linemen in the Big Ten. Now, what are his cons? He needs more pass rushing moves in his repertoire. He defaults to his outright raw power too often. He defaults to that bull rush. He needs to learn more of the grace associated with being a pass rusher, more moves. He's only played the position for 2 years. Sometimes he looks like it. And he didn't start at Iowa, which I find to be a very interesting knock on him. He didn't start at Iowa, but yet he played more reps than the starters did. And when you really dive into if that was a concern or not, I know very little about Iowa football. Can't say I follow them a ton. Turns out they always give the default starts to their upperclassmen. And he was just younger than all of them, but they still played him just as much, if not more, in most games than those starters. So I don't consider that to be a true concern. After the pick was made at the very end of the night last night, Brian Gutekunst gave his traditional round 1 press conference. And he just kind of highlighted a couple things, said that he absolutely loves the versatility that Lukas Van Ness has, that he can play inside or out. He referenced the Darius Smith in that. They've tried to do some of the same with Rashawn Gary. It just isn't the same. So he referenced how Z used to kick inside and out. It's actually easy to see some ways the Green Bay Packers could get Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, and Lukas Van Ness on the field at the same time. Pair that with Kenny Clark, too. You have a quality pass rush, to say the least. It's going to be a great edge rotation. He also talked about how Lukas Van Ness is a hard worker and a true culture fit, which we know is very, very important to the Green Bay Packers in the Packer way. He did make mention of having spent 7 of the last 8 first-round picks on defense. His expectation as the general manager is that the defense is going to show out this year. He has very high expectations for the defense, and he didn't say as much. This is kind of putting words in his mouth, but you have to believe that after so much investment on the defensive side of the ball, he's expecting that we're going to see a top 10 defense, a true unit that can get after the quarterback, assuming health, which, as we all know, was a problem last year. And then he also said that towards the back end of the first round, they did look into moving up, but it just wasn't worth it. He worked hard to acquire the Jets pick 42, and he doesn't want to give it up easily. And that makes a lot of sense. Look, my overall take, yeah, I was underwhelmed last night when they chose Van Ness. But then I learned a couple of things, and I looked at Van Ness again. I believe Janelle pointed out in the chat last night that the Patriots were all hot and heavy for Lukas Van Ness, had him in for a visit. And I dove into this morning a couple of the New England local stuff, and yeah, no, they wanted Lukas Van Ness. And when the Packers, and keep in mind the Patriots picked 14, so it's possible that as soon as they saw, because then the Patriots traded right out of 14 after the Packers made the pick. So just keep in mind, it could have been that Goody felt the need to get up to 13 because he knew the Patriots were hot and heavy for Lukas Van Ness, and Goot wanted his guy. The other thing that I'll say, too, is I was underwhelmed because, like I said earlier, I want to evaluate Jordan, and how do you do that without having complete wide receiver and tight end rooms? But when looking at who's available now, the collection of wide receivers, the collection of tight ends, versus the collection of edge players, to be in the position of the Packers right now, especially considering that Michael Mayer is falling into round 2, and granted, he may go before the Packers pick at 42. There's still 10 picks to go in the second round before the Packers go. But still, I'd rather be choosing a tight end from the collection of Michael Mayer, Darnell Washington, Musgrave, Kraft, Laporta, rather be getting a tight end from that crew, or a wide receiver from Mingo, Rice, Hyatt, Tillman. Because keep in mind, a lot of those wide receivers that were picked last night, Addison was probably never going to be picked by the Packers. He didn't meet any of their thresholds. Zay Flowers, same deal. He's too small for the Packers. Beyond that, Quentin Johnston was not going to get picked by the Packers because of his 3-cone time. The only one that could have been picked by the Packers last night was JSN. And I've talked a lot about why I felt JSN was a strong match, but it wasn't a perfect match, especially if Matt LaFleur doesn't want to use slot receivers. So if the Packers are looking for their types of wide receivers, here they are in rounds 2 or 3, being, Rice, Mingo, Tillman to a lesser extent, and then one guy that doesn't fit their normal thresholds, but apparently they love, in Hyatt from Tennessee. And I'd rather be picking from that collection of what's available at pass catchers than I would at what's left at edge, which is a lot more projects. As I was saying last week, I think the gap between first and third round edge players is larger than the gap between first and third round wide receivers. There's projects across the board. This is not a strong draft. It's a top-heavy draft. So it's top-heavy while being incredibly even across all the middle rounds. I know that kind of conflicts with itself, but it's true. So I get it. I very much get it. And if the Green Bay Packers walk out tonight with your first 3 picks being Luke Van Ness, Jonathan Mingo, and Darnell Washington, who cares what order they went in? But if they walk out of that draft with those 3, are you terribly upset? And maybe you are. But let's say that they walk out with Michael Mayer, LVN, and Hyatt from Tennessee. Are you upset? The Packers have the ability to make that happen tonight. Now, if we get through today and they have chosen no pass catchers, all right, okay, then we can really start being angry. I probably will be. because they need bodies. But we'll get there. The other thing about the Lukas Van Ness pick is it's really good for the future of the position. Keep in mind, Preston Smith is getting up there in age, and looking at his contract, I believe I talked about this last night with Marchdog in the chat. Looking over his contract, Preston Smith's time in Green Bay realistically has 1 to 2 years left, depending on how they handle it. And I mentioned last night that I believe, per how they did the restructure, it really is 2 years that Preston still has left before it makes sense monetarily to release him. And the reason why I say that, I pulled the numbers from overthecap.com. They're saying that if you were to cut Preston Smith next year, you're going to take on $13.9 million in dead money and free up 2.5. That makes it incredibly not worth it. Meanwhile, the next year, you're going to take on 9 in dead money and 7 in relief. Now, you could even argue that that's not incredibly worth it, unless they pull the trickery of doing a June 1 release next year. Then now the numbers flip a little bit. You're going to take on 4 in dead cap versus 12 in relief. The Packers aren't super prone to doing June 1 cuts. Generally, they need the money earlier than that. So I still think Preston Smith's contract looks to me like a 2-year deal. Like he's going to be in Green Bay for 2 years. And maybe I'm wrong because maybe they'll switch more stuff around. But it looks from the outset, given the contract right now, I believe he's in Green Bay for 2 years. All right, so looking ahead, a little bit more full of a list on day 2 as we get into tonight. At wide receiver, the Packer types, you've got Jonathan Mingo, Cedric Tillman, Rashid Rice, A.T. Perry, and Hyatt, who we at least know that they love. At tight end, you got Laporta, Michael Mayer, Washington, Kraft, Musgrave. Offensive lineman, you've got Matthew Bergeron, if they decide to go that direction, the O-lineman from Syracuse. DeWand Jones, the statue from Ohio State. No, not statue. He's shockingly nimble for being a 400-pound man. The Mountain, DeWand Jones. We'll go with that. Cody Mauch from North Dakota, very, very common mocked to the Packers player. On the defensive line, if you want to go there, you've got options from Wisconsin, Keanu Benton, Gervin Dexter from Florida, and then 2 guys who are borderline edge D-line. They're kind of tweeners. I think in Green Bay, they'd be more likely to be D-line. You got Keon White or Adebo Warre from Northwestern. And if you still want him, I think the value has to be incredible for Green Bay to look at him, but I know some of you still want him. Safety from Alabama, Brian Branch, still out there. So look, the Packers got themselves an explosive, capable edge player. Someone that, yes, does need to learn more of the position. He's got 2 excellent teachers in Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith, and they can form a tremendous trio a la Preston Smith, Za'Darius Smith, and a baby Rashawn Gary. And they still have options. I know we want pass catchers. I know we want O-linemen. I know we want D-linemen. We got to fortify the trenches. We got to have someone catch the ball for Jordan. All this stuff. Even a safety, even though I don't think they're going to go that way today. I see that being addressed tomorrow with one of the later picks. They got options. And, you know, the totality of a draft, or I should say, a draft shouldn't be judged until you know the totality of the picture. And what we know right now is they got a hyper-athletic freak to add into their edge rotation. That's not a bad thing. Thanks for tuning into Lombardi Time Brews. Remember, we're going live tonight. We're going to be live tomorrow. I may also put a video out super late tonight recapping what they do tonight. And then for sure, next week I'll be here breaking down the draft, all of that stuff, and then we'll take a look at the future from there. So thanks so much for joining Lombardi Time Brews. I hope you're having a wonderful Friday. See you tonight in the chat. Hopefully you can carve out a little bit of time for Lombardi Time Brews. And as always, go Pack Go.